to the cloud. Here we go. Does it say we're recording?
Yep.
We are. Wonderful. Hello. Welcome to the 14th in our series of 16 audio-enabled EDA STEP workshop sessions. We're delighted you're here. My name is Annette, and I'm in full recovery from an eating disorder. Before we get started, a few caveats. This session of the EDA STEP workshop is being recorded. We hope to make audio recordings of the workshop accessible to everyone. Please note that these audio recordings will not be available on the EDA website until they've gone through the full vetting process. We will, however, be sending information about the recordings to the General Service Board distribution list. If you're not currently on the email contact list, please drop a line to info@eatingdisordersanonymous.org and we'll get you added. Reminder, listening to a recording is not a substitute for attending meetings or working the steps. We encourage you to check out our meetings pages, which include face-to-face, online, and teleconference meetings. Just like what you might find at an EDA group, what you're about to hear reflects experiences and opinions of individual EDA members that may or may not tally with your own. Please take what you can use and leave the rest. You do not need a sponsor to attend this workshop. We will all be working the steps of EDA together, myself included. To make things easier for everyone, we've muted everybody as they join. If you'd like to be heard, please unmute your phone by using *6 on your phone or Alt-A if you're on a computer. You can unmute and mute using the same key combination. Because there's so many of us, we won't all get a chance to introduce ourselves. However, if you're speaking, please do tell us your first name and where you're from. Last week in EDA Workshop Session 13, Giselle, myself, Emily, Ellen, Rebecca, and a few others discovered how Step 8 informs Step 9, and we talked about examples from our own 9th steps. We reflected on the EDA Big Book from pages 182 through 186 and workshop worksheets pages 30 and 31. We also read the promises of EDA together. Tonight, we'll be talking about how Step 9 informs Step 10. We'll discuss how working Steps 10, 11, and 12 help us grow into full recovery. We'll talk about EDA Big Book content from page 186 halfway through 192, page 498, and pages 517 to 521. We have a few folks available on the call, sponsors, able to address questions sponsees often ask, and we'll commit to take Step 10 together. We'll then review assignments for next week. Right now, I'd like to ask anyone on the call who sponsors others in EDA to identify yourself so we may call on you during the question and answer session. This doesn't imply that you're currently accepting new sponsees. However, if you are, that would be sure great to know. Please tell us your first name and city.
Can you get rid of the static?
I am not sure. So I think we can mute everybody. That's a great question. Let me try that. Okay, that seems like it took care of it. If you are a sponsor and would like to introduce yourself, or if you're going to be speaking tonight, please tell us your first name and where you're from. *6 to unmute or Alt-A if you're on a computer.
Hi, this is Leslie.
I'm
in New York City.
Oh.
Hi, Leslie, continue.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm in Phoenix.
Hi, Emily. Thanks for joining.
This is Nuria. I'm recovered from an eating disorder, and I am in Charleston, South Carolina.
Welcome, Nuria. It's always a pleasure to have you on the call.
Thank you.
I think I heard Leslie. Leslie, can you continue?
Yes, hi, this is Leslie. I'm in New York City, and I'm recovered from an eating disorder.
Welcome, Leslie. Yay.
Yay.
And I think we've got a few folks who might also be joining later. Hopefully they'll be able to join. I know we had a few conflicts with work. It's a busy time of year for many. Okay, so today we're going to go ahead and get started, just talking a little bit about background, and I was wondering if anybody wanted to talk just generally about steps 10, 11, and 12, because they're really kind of some people call them the maintenance steps, but a lot of folks really prefer to think of them as the growth steps. The first 9 steps put a foundation in place, but it's steps 10, 11, and 12 that actually help us grow into the people that we want to be, people of dignity and integrity, that are able to go out and do the work in the world that we think needs to be done. So I was actually planning on kind of changing it out a little bit, having people that are interested in talking about these steps kind of share a little bit about their experiences with how these steps have helped them establish full recovery. So I'm opening the floor. Anybody?
I can jump
Hi,
in. This is Leslie in New York, but I defer whoever else spoke. I will just jump in. Hi, this is Leslie in New York City. I 10, 11, 12. I remember my sponsor saying that she lives in 10, 11, and 12. And exactly what Annette just said is that, you know, it's the way that the way that I have grown, because it's a way of living that actually works. So step 10 is continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So like that is such a relief for me, because I don't have to carry around guilt, because when I do something that is against my values, I apologize right away, or I make some kind of amends right away. And it's just such a relief to do that. And then 11 is about how to handle, my son just found something, sorry about that. So step 11 is about praying and like how we get our information. And then step 12 is carrying the message. So, and being of service. So these 3 things are like, it's a pattern that actually, it's a like a blueprint that actually works. Thanks.
That was terrific, Leslie. Thanks so much.
This is Nuria, recovered from an eating disorder from Charleston, South Carolina.
Hello, Nuria.
Hey, so by the time I had gotten to steps 10, most of the behaviors had subsided. I was still obsessing, and I was still trying to, figure out how to apply these steps and how to, like into day-to-day living. And thankfully, that's what like steps 10, 11, and 12 are all about. It's like, okay, so the other steps were dealing with the past and how we looked at things, and in my case, how I was a victim to so many other things, and how am I going to start changing with the help of my higher power, and what am I going to do to clean up the past and start to live differently. But then it was like, okay, well, how am I going to live differently? And because my old way of living did not work. So luckily by this point, I have a lot of information and different ways of processing ideas, behaviors, how to deal with people differently, how to react differently, how to pause. And so for me, steps 10, it's like, okay, so I need to, I did all this work to figure out like what was the underlying, the causes and conditions of my eating disorder. My eating disorder was just but a symptom. And so I had all this information. So now what? Like, how am I, okay, that's great, but now what? And so now it's like, okay, I see the past, but I need to learn how to apply that same different type of thinking that I learned through working the steps for day-to-day material. So, I got unblocked from my higher power as a result of doing the steps. I need to remain unblocked and learn how to deal with my feelings and learn how to live life differently and treat people differently, including myself. And that's where that like daily inventory, spot check inventories that we'll get into really help me. And so it's like clearing out the stuff, clearing up the crap that was blocking me and that continues to block me. And so then I seek that guidance from my higher power, God as I understand him in my case, and I learn how to pause and sit back and ask not just for guidance, but to actually listen I was always go, 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 which I'm dealing with that still today, years later. But I need to learn how to sit back and reflect. Now that I'm not blocked because I've done an inventory, now I need to sit back and reflect and try to see what kind of guidance comes through. My intuition sometimes helps me. And, all that work is great for me, but I have to be really careful not to fall into, I need to work on myself, and I need to work on myself, and I need to just relax. I have to be really careful because for me, that can quickly turn into self-centeredness. And then it's all about me, 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 me. And that was like the problem of a lot of my issues with my eating disorder. And so having the ability of achieving any type of recovery, I wasn't fully recovered at that time, but any hint of recovery, like I needed to share that with other people. I needed to carry the message. I needed to get out of myself and help those that I could help to the best of my ability to keep me outside of myself. And coincidentally, through doing that, I ended up learning more about the steps, by trying to help other people. It helped me even understand them even better. So that is my experience with steps 10, 11, 12.
Thank you so much for that. Nuria, it's always inspiring to hear you. Does anybody else want to just kind of talk about these steps as a group? Because we're launching into a whole new section. It's the new chapter. Like we first read, this whole process of how it works, and then the next steps were 5 through 9 was, into action. And now the section here now, which is, well, actually we're still into action, but the key thing is steps 10, 11, and 12, I think of as kind of a cohesive whole that kind of put rubber to the road. It's like, it's all very well and good to do these things in isolation when we're working those initial steps, and we're talking to a few people here and there, but it's really in 10, 11, 12 that we bring it out into our daily lives, and we start dealing with like the root causes as they manifest in what shows up in what we feel, what shows up in how we relate to people, what shows up in terms of how we fit into like a purpose for our lives. Those things come with practice, and I really struggled with them. I mean, so step 10 was continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. I didn't have a problem admitting when I was wrong, which was like every day about everything, but but I had problems like keeping it in context. I had trouble with this, the moral inventory, the way it was described to me. It was like, it was really about like everything I did wrong. And what I discovered was the more I focused on what I did wrong, the worse I felt. And that felt just like why I had an eating disorder. So it didn't feel warm and friendly to me when I first started working these steps. It was kind of like, oh, it's like self-flagellation, which is completely the opposite of what step 10 needs to be, which is like shining a light on how we're doing. That inspection, adaptation enables transformation. Well, I didn't really get that until I tried to apply this to help others. It was like I understood the concept because I had done my step 4, which is really kind of like step 10, to be honest. Step 10's got a little bit of extra special in it to keep it from being negative. But step 11, I also struggled with. So step 10 was just like, oh, self-flagellation. Step 11 was like, oh, go do this thing that I have absolutely no confidence in. Let's saw it through prayer and meditation. And as a person that struggled with spiritual concepts, step 11 presented special challenges. So I really didn't, I had this sense of like, yeah, there's a greater purpose, and yeah, I can kind of map myself into this, but I couldn't really leverage it because of those words in part, they were an impediment to me. So for me, I had to make it meaningful and work for me. And so but that is where, again, rubber meets the road. It's like, how are you going to operationalize these ideas that may or may not have purchase with the way you think of yourself and the way you think of life? So for me, it was important not only that I would be able to do this, but that I live it. And so step 12 is really where you get to see if it's really working. It's like carry this message to others and practice these principles in all our affairs. Well, do I have integrity? Do I if I'm committing to something, am I able to follow through? How am I doing in the way I respect others? Am I able to build trust with myself and others? Am I somebody that I can rely on to focus on the next right thing? Step 12 keeps reminding me that the things that matter are those relationships. The things that matter are the people. It's about what we do and how we do it in relationships. So I really think these three things it's like that's the pattern for living that really works, because it's all of the steps that lead up to this and then some. Anyway, but I'm really excited about launching into this last phase of our workshop, and I hope you are too, because I think that people get here and they're kind of confused. It's like, well, but aren't I supposed to, the 12, we just read those 9-step promises, I'm not recovered yet. What's wrong? Am I doing it right? And I just need to tell people that be patient, because this process of recovery is not an overnight matter. It really is a process, not an event, and it takes sometimes years. So don't be discouraged. Every effort that you put into recovery will pay back. It's just, remind yourself how amazing it is that you've been able to change the way you respond to things. When life's provocations, come up, your first thought may still be the same. It may be knee-jerk negativity. It may be anxiety. It may be, fear of many forms. It may be anger. If you're working a program of a 12-step program, your next thought, like what you do with that first thought, is what the critical thing is. And anything you do that changes that, and even just to think about it, oh, look, I'm having a thought, that's tremendous progress. So please don't be discouraged. This stuff it does really gain traction as you go. All right, anybody else want to share on steps 10, 11, and 12 as a unit?
I would.
Oh, please do.
I heard a lot about living amends, and this is the one that I had the greatest problem with in steps 10, 11, and 12, because I, for the longest time, an embarrassingly long time, confused living amends with perpetual atonement, especially when it came to my children, because, you can't undo the past. And by making it a perpetual atonement, rather than just simply being different with them and having my focus on them, it kept the focus on me and perpetuated my worst ever defect, which is self-centeredness. And so I've finally begun to get past that. And it really makes a huge difference in my relationships. If I'm thinking about me, I'm not present for other people. If I'm self-conscious, I'm not really there for other people. I'm not facing the same right direction, I too, like Annette, I was just totally non-religious and anti-religion. I don't know if you are, but I was, given some early childhood really bad experiences with when my mom wanted us to see how the other half lived and send us off to church with a neighbor. So I have come a long way in that. Meditation was always easy because meditation is just so much fun, I can sit and breathe and listen to my breath, and it's just easy. As for the 12-step work, I was told early on in AA that 12-step can be anything that you're doing, like it's making the coffee, it's showing up and sharing. It doesn't have to be working intensely with a newcomer. And when I became unable to attend live meetings, that became very important to me, to remember all the ways I can give service. And I don't confine my giving service to other people in the program or potentially in the program who may need help. It's service every day in whichever way it can be. you know, it's a smile for the person at the checkout line. It's, you know, it's saying hi to the neighbor. It's every interaction. And I think it comes a lot easier that way, to just make it part of your daily thing. And that's enough out of me. Thanks.
Thanks, Bonnie. It's great to hear you. And I'm really, can you just tell us where you're from real quick? I'd like people.
I'm in Auburn, California.
All right, wonderful. So glad to have you. All right, so we've got a few other people who have just joined, and I'm gonna have them share either on the panel or to reflect specifically on how they work the step for step 10, because this is our focus today, is step 10. So some of the keys are they're identified on pages 186 through 192, 498, and 517 to 521. So we're just going to kind of roll through those really quickly. But, you know, one of the main things about step 10 is keep it simple. So that's the one in the middle of the page, but it's something that a lot of different 12-step programs reinforce. And the main thing is that if we keep it simple, it keeps us grounded. If we keep it simple, it's not so hard to regain perspective. If we keep it simple, it means taking our limitations as they come and not setting goals that are unattainable. So when we go back to page 186, the long form of step 10 suggests, as we continue to listen to our conscience. When troubled, we get honest, make amends, and change our thinking or behavior. We continue to notice what we do right, and we're grateful when engaged in right thinking and positive action. When we're able to be deliberate and calm in our interactions with others despite our own troubles, we're demonstrating reliance on our new perspective that places a higher value on service than on our own personal challenges and rewards. The results of taking this approach often are great. Sometimes, despite the best of intentions, we get caught up in self-will. We take our limitations as they come, knowing that our experiences help us empathize with others. We're grateful to be human, and we do our best to find and share the humor in our problems. So that's kind of a key point. Humor really helps. When I can laugh at myself, I know I'm okay. It's just sort of like, that's sanity, being able to look at our situation, and instead of hand wringing, which I do, and instead of like making it into a big dramatic like fuss, it's like, oh my gosh, look at me, look at what I'm doing, and just having a sense of like, it's okay, acceptance about it. So a couple of points that are mentioned here in these pages include, dealing with things as they come up. Don't wait. So that's kind of that spot check inventory, which I know several people are going to talk about. So it's really not necessarily very formal, but it's like, if I'm having weird things that are like, somebody looks at me sideways or says some comment, and all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed with shame or fear, that is a time for me where I just need to kind of like take a step back, lest I go rushing off and do something foolish. And not that I don't ever rush off and do foolish things, I do that all the time. But if I'm able to really look at what I'm feeling, which could be fear. It's like last night we had a deployment that went into production, and we immediately had to roll it back, affecting millions of people. It was great. It was not great at all. But so what did I have? I had fear that I would lose my job. I had fear that they were going to disband my team. There's all kinds of fears that came up. Was I able to actually in the moment process that? And the answer is no. What I did is I did table it, but I worked on it later. I didn't actually have the opportunity because there was too much stuff going on. But when it was over, I kind of reflected on what had gone right. I looked at what would I have done differently. And so those are the things that actually keep me from running off and looking at the pantry like it holds some kind of solution. It's not like that comes up for me. It's so funny. It's like, I was in a situation the other day where I was reminded of a behavior, and it blew my mind, because I'm like, what, I've been in this situation like hundreds of times, and it just never occurred to me that, oh my gosh, this is actually a very familiar situation. I was like, oh, and I hadn't had any kind of eating disordered thoughts, and it was like this little like aha moment for me, and I'm proud of that, and I'm grateful for it. It's a byproduct of doing the right things. It's not like an intention, like I will never think this thought again. I've never had that work. But working these steps, working step 10, has made it possible for me to not have to think in eating disordered ways or have obsessive thoughts about these things like at all, that's amazing to me. Anyway, so keeping the 10 steps simple. So there's the spot check inventory, but a lot of what I find is that if I'm not taking care of basics, I'm much more reactive. So if I'm hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or ashamed, I am going to be like in this raw state where I'm like not really fully an adult, and whatever I might think at that point is going to be like out of that position of like victimhood, because children are helpless. They're not able to take they're really pretty powerless, and they don't have that sense of, they really require a lot of attention, a lot of, they're pretty selfish because they don't get what they need. They don't know how to deliver it to themselves. Our job is to deliver these things to ourselves. So part of step 10 for me is just checking in. It's like, and taking care of these things, because I didn't know that. It's like I was in my 30s really before I got this, a really solid grip on the fact that no, actually it's my job to take care of this stuff. Totally didn't get it. But anyway, so I'm pretty much done with this page, but I was going to invite other people to reflect on these pages. So first things first, regular triage helps build objectivity. Yeah, it's like if I get myself caught up and all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed with shame because I'm looking at pictures of houses online instead of doing what I'm supposed to do, that's a red flag for me. It's like, okay, obviously I'm avoiding something. What is that? So triage helps build objectivity. I can usually figure, I may still choose to look at houses. We're thinking we have to move. So this has become like an obsessive thing for me. But, anytime my mind goes to areas that I think are less than productive, I have to, it does actually like bring up all of those healthy 10-step practices, which make me ask, so what is it that I'm avoiding? What is it that is too painful or too, shameful for me to actually really think about how to solve them? And, a lot of times I'll come up with a solution and be like, can't really do that right now. But it gives me the permission to be an adult. So I can still choose to do the same things. I can still choose to do things that are maybe non-productive, but I'm making an adult informed choice to deliver that to myself, because what I really need right at the moment to make me feel better might be distraction. So that's the cool thing about step 10. It gives us the power of choice. And I will turn this over now to somebody who else wants to talk about some of these things. We have a lot more pages, I got to tell you. So finding the humor, being an adult, keeping your word, all these things. Yeah, okay. Who else wants to speak to this? Star 6. Hey, Dev, can I ask you to speak?
Hi, this is Nuria from South Carolina.
Hey, Nuria.
Hey, and it's kind of, I know Annette mentioned it too, and because I can be really good at beating myself. And although I need to know where, what's going on underneath, where I'm falling short, I think it is also important for me to acknowledge the good. And that's, the good I'm doing, acknowledging what I am grateful for. And on page 189, it says, the third bullet point, find the positive. No matter how difficult our situation, there will always be reasons for respect and gratitude. It helps a great deal to remind ourselves about what is going right in ourselves, our loved ones, our colleagues, society, and the world. Because I can tell you, some of my step work about the past is I was like Debbie Downer, and I was miserable, and I just like brought everyone down with me, and I was miserable and just dark. And I was not a very nice person to people. And so I learned, and I didn't feel good about that. And that really, I just would act out more and more as a result. So learning how to be more positive, bring light, be grateful. My life might not be all wonderful and perfect and full of rainbows and ponies or whatever. Oh, you can tell I have 2 girls. But, just being able to point out like, hey, I'm so grateful that I handled this situation differently, or I'm so grateful they're doing good, not always making it all about me and trying to find the good in others. So yes, it's an inventory, but it's also taking an inventory of the good that involves us personally, but also the good around us as well. So I think that to me, even still this day, I have to make sure that I'm finding the positive and remaining grateful, because I can easily get down in the dumps and all the self. And then it's like, I do an inventory and by the end I'm like, oh, now I'm feeling self-pity. I'm like, okay, hold on, turn it around. Gratitude. Well, what am I grateful for? And it's just great because I can do that in the nightly review, but even in the spot checks, you know, I can identify those feelings and learn, you know, see, okay, well, what do I need to do to change? How, you know, what do I need to put in, you know, in God's hands, as I like to think of it. And then it's like, okay, now let me focus on what I can. Let me focus on the goodness. So I think that's definitely an important part for my personal inventory for sure.
Thank you so much, Nuria. And that's a really critical point, because you know, negativity, I think, is actually the root of most of everything that's wrong with me, is just looking at the glass as, you know, half empty, or really, you know, full of nothingness. But
that's more like me.
Yeah. So, you know, the thing is that now part of what I train myself to do is, when I am having negative thoughts, it's like, it's the tripwire for me going like, oh, ooh, spot check. Because I need to look at what's going right. And when I actually hand that out to others, it's like, you know, at work, I hand out lots of compliments for things, and I look for things that people are doing right. It helps me do it for myself, and it helps make things go much more smoothly. So yeah, it's a wonderful practice, and it really helps inform my recovery. I don't think if I hadn't changed that and hadn't added, and you know, and I hated gratitude lists. Oh my gosh, you know, it's like I did not want to do this. It's like the idea of having to do a gratitude list was kind of like, okay, now honey, write your thank you cards after, you know, people gave me gifts I didn't want, you know, so it was miserable. And what changed for me is, I don't really just think about like, I'm so grateful that, you know, people have treated me nicely today. I'm not in charge of that, right? What I am in charge of is what decisions I've made that I'm proud of. So I do things that make me proud so that I can reflect on them positively later. It actually works. And, you know, even if I'm not able to do the things that I think I should do, I can find something to do that I know that I will be proud of in the end. And so it's kind of, it's almost like a gimmicky kind of thing in a way, but it isn't, because, you know, in the midst of all of those things that I do that I think are useful or that I can be proud of, I'm really focusing on what it may mean to others. And that's where getting out of ourselves, it kind of begins to get traction. Bonnie mentioned that too. It's like, you know, selfishness is not an evil, miserable condition. Actually, it is the natural state of any child. Children are selfish because they need to get taken care of. And until their needs are met, they're not able to bridge out past that. So our goal in step 10 is to turn ourselves into like functioning and happy adults. And you can't just say, well, I'll be an adult now, or I'm going to be happy. It's more like, if we focus on doing the next right things, tying that back to principles and things that matter to us, you know, the sense of a higher purpose, the sense of a higher power, you know, having a God inform us about, you know, what is the thing that we can turn our time, attention, talents, training to do. Those are the things that give our lives meaning. And I just think that it's fun. It turns into, you know, this veil of tears and, you know, hand-wringing misery into like new opportunities and fun things to do. Now, if you talk to my husband, I think you'd be happy to inform you that I do very few things that look fun to him, but that is a thing that's on my 10 step, or my 4 step, and does regularly make it as well. All right, so honesty restores integrity. So if you're screwing things up, being clear with other people about how you're going to be different, and doing everything in your power to honor that and to respect it helps. But be positive about small incremental change. That's important. Recovery isn't rigid. So you're going to find that you're going to make choices and you'll be like, why the heck did I do that? You know, and it's, if you peel it back, it's not like some weird, illogical, monstrous thought. It's a series of things that you may not have been paying attention to that are really like driving the bus. And so if you don't have an adult who's taking charge and driving the bus, your inner children will be doing this for you. And they may take that bus places that you had no intention of going. So be careful with them. You know, make sure they're strapped in, taken care of, and they will be quiet and you can actually be an adult. So that's my share on that. Emily, we've got Dev. Dev, can you share a little bit? Alt-A or *6 to unmute.
I think I'm unmuted.
Yay! You
Yay.
are.
Okay, good. Well, thank you so much, Annette. This has been really, really helpful. I got here late, but everything has been so inspiring. Step 10 is something that I resisted big time when it came to start doing step 10. I just didn't want to write anymore. I used to write a lot, in my journey of recovery with this eating disorder. I've had many, many years of, other 12-step programs that didn't really stick or didn't work until I found EDA. And so I guess I had this thought that if I wrote, it was just the same stuff over and over and over, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. I was sick of it. But thankfully, I had a wonderful sponsor who helped me to break it down into little small pieces. And I have to say, step 10 has saved me, totally saved me. It is what's allowed me to move forward in a directional progress. Like, I was always looking for the big sweeping change that would make me all well, and that suddenly I would never want to overeat again. Suddenly everything would be perfect. Suddenly there's no more problems. Well, as you know, as all of you know, and anyone who's been around for a while, that just doesn't happen that way. Step 10 slowed me down. It made me realize it was every little thing that happened throughout the day that actually creates that environment of wanting to run away, or creates that feeling that I eventually get to. It's little incremental choices, little underlying beliefs, like that I'm not lovable maybe, or something like that. That step 10 has allowed me to unpeel that stuff. And then when I get to what it really is that I'm feeling, what really was being triggered, then I can address that directly, and I no longer need to run and hide in food. And I mean, it's really, I can't say enough about this step. Has been my favorite. It started with this attitude of, no way, I can't, it was like just so difficult to get me to even pick up a pen or think about writing again. And now it's the thing that is saving my life, really. I mean, every time that I have some difficulty, some painful experience throughout the day, I have this tool that helps me see what it is, what is really going on. What do I need to do? What do I need to do to maybe correct the situation? What do I need to do to address it in a way that will create healing instead of hiding? This getting open with others, honesty restores integrity. It's like honesty with ourself restores integrity with ourself. And I think that for me, with the eating disorder, with bulimia, which was my core eating disorder, there was so much shame and so much self-hatred, no self-integrity or self-worth. And, being able to be completely self-honest, and that I'm not this terrible person, that it's just really some deeper need that I was trying to fill, or some other thing that was going on. Addressing that has helped me make better choices and feel more like, hey, I'm not that much different than everybody else. I'm just moving through life the best I can, and now I have tools. I'm so grateful, and also the positivity, bringing that in has been incredible, and the gratitude. So I don't want to talk too long because I'm sure there are others that want to share, but I'm just really grateful for this step. It's really been tremendous for me. Even a short little step 10 can completely shift my awareness. And help me make the right choice, the next right choice, whatever that is. So I'll mute myself now. Are we done?
Thanks. That was wonderful, Dov. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. I have a few other people who had volunteered. I'm not sure. Emily, I heard your voice.
I was like, yeah, and then I remembered that I was muted. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, sure. I'd love to. I love everything I've heard. There's a lot to say about Step 10. I hear, when I first, I kind of wanted to talk real briefly about like all the different, because Step 10 is one that's grown with me, or I've grown with it throughout my journey through the steps. Because, first of all, I think it's important to remember that you're not ready for a step until you're at that step. And I remember thinking with Step 10, like, how am I going to do that every day? And I should be doing that every day right now. And, it just feels different when you get there. Looking back, like, I got ready for this phone call and I pulled out like 4 notebooks full of inventories that I've done. And I think I have more somewhere. And I was like, oh my gosh, these are all inventories, because if you do it every day, then you're going to get a lot. So I started with like using an app on my phone. I also used the notes on my phone, like, 'cause I also was very reluctant to like throw myself into like some big, I just had a lot of resistance to the 10th step because I think like Annette was saying, I had a lot of negativity towards myself. And when I first started, I was very strict with myself and I wanted to do it just like the big book said, because that's how I was taken through. And the big book has like this when we retire at night section, which is wonderful. So for a while I did it that way. And for a lot of people that totally works, but for whatever reason for me, it was like really not working. It was doing its job, but it was not, I was not focusing on the positive enough and I was not giving myself, I was like finishing my inventory and feeling depressed. So then reading the EDA big book, I started to realize that it's really about being aware of your feelings, like all of your feelings, the good and the bad, just that come up during the day. So I just started to write about those, about just, happy feelings, sad feelings, curious feelings. And one thing I noticed was that when I did my 10th step at night, because night was always a challenging time for me, I would tend to overeat and still do sometimes. But definitely when I was binging, it was like, that's the time. And the Step 10 would consistently, when I did it, save me. Sometimes I would have the urge to use the behavior, and then I would do Step 10, and I would no longer have the urge. So like, oh man. And then sometimes I would use the behavior and I would look back and I would go, I did not do my Step 10 tonight. So sometimes it had a very direct effect on me and my behaviors because, it's just about putting it out there, putting all these things that go on in my head that I just kind of let graze under the surface and actually putting them in front of me and saying, this is real. And like, this is how I felt, even if it doesn't seem like it was rational, or even if it's not convenient, like this is how I felt and it's okay. And we can look at that and like give it a voice. So, over time, I don't know, my format has changed a lot, based on things I've heard from other people, based on seminars I've been to, based on the big book of EDA. I now include gratitudes, right thinking and positive action, which is like, hey, things I did well. And I kind of wanted to share, like, it still continues to change, like it's still changing all the time. But it was about meeting myself where I'm at always, and when I lost my cat in March, I was like severely depressed, and I stopped doing, one of the things I stopped doing was my inventory. I still went to meetings. I was still kind of in that habit enough. But I noticed over the course of like less than a month, the emotional like repercussions of not doing it. And they're what I would call emotional hangovers. waking up the next day, still holding on to things from 2 or 3 days ago or the day before, and like really just things just slogging me down, no longer letting it out on the page. So, I actually have in front of me the inventory I did the first, it was about a little over a month after I lost my cat. The first thing I wrote about was grief and despair. And seeing the last inventory that I did was the day that my cat went into the hospital. But I needed to start there. I wasn't happy about writing about it. I wasn't happy about logging these feelings, but it really helped me to accept where I was at, reconnect with like my program and my higher power, and to continue on from there, and not let myself get so swallowed up by things. So I just, but I needed to step away from it to realize what I was missing from doing it. So, it's all part of the process. And with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Emily. That's so great to hear. Sort of even like the difficult, specific examples I think are really helpful. We have a series of questions to get through, but I did actually want to review the 10-step format. Those of you who are familiar with other formats may find some parts of it very, very the same, and some parts are kind of different. So in EDA's step format, which is described in various places in the book, but is also on page 33 on the workshop worksheets, it's broken down into 4 sections, basically. And the first is events. And the reason the events are there is to try and prompt ideas about like feelings that we had throughout the day. Because if you're like me, you're probably like not going to want to remember those times that you didn't feel so amazing. You're going to want to be like, oh, it was fine. But maybe it wasn't really fine, and there is a lot of pain or something that I'm really avoiding. So it's helpful to remember the events, because as I'm going through that, it'll prompt things that come up. The second section is about issues, and that's really like working a tiny step 4 on just 1 or 2 things, because we're going to time box this stuff. If you sit down to do a step 10 and you're going to do an inventory of everything that happened in the day, you're going to be there half the night. And it's like, what, for me, I don't have the boundaries around that. If I'm really tired, it literally could take half the night. This would be a terrible, awful thing. So I try to do it in the mornings, just because it's easier to time box things then. And I also find that just focusing on 1 or 2 issues that came up is really enough, because it'll give me, it's like whatever I felt the most hot emotion about, just like we do when we're going through the 4th step, writing about like what was the source of my problem or pain. What was the cause, like the thing that was the most provocative? It's like, okay, so the thing that freaked me out last night was that, I was frightened that it would, my failures and my role at work were the immediate cause of my teams having to pull a production deployment out. So there was a lot of fear around that. So what did that affect? Well, it affected my financial security, my ambition. It affected a whole lot of things, my family relationships, because people depend on me. I mean, so all of the stuff came burbling to the top. My error and my part is like, actually no, is just focus on the next right thing. So making it all about me was part of my part. When in fact I could productively turn my time and attention to, hey, what can we learn from this? How can we take this experience and make it a learning opportunity for my team? Help inform management about the ways in which my team needs better supports. There are all kinds of things that I could have done with it. And so that was my resolution, is just like, hey, there were people who did amazing things to try to ensure that when we backed things out, everything was in good shape. It turns out it was really not our code that was the problem. Anyway, long story short, but the point is, it gives us that resolution, the opportunity to figure out what we can do to restore peace, or to restore something that feels whole and wholesome and productive out of whatever situation that was. So I do that with 1 or 2 things, and then the next section is really focused on like, the issue section also includes 2 questions. Is there anything I need to urgently do to set right wrongs? And is there anything I need to discuss with somebody else? So most of the time the answer is no, but that's not always the case. So it's an opportunity to kind of like, again, when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So figuring out what we need to do with that. gratitude. And the key part there, a lot of people have mentioned it, is focusing on what we did right, because it's so easy to just feel like, oh, well, I'm insane. It's like, clearly I can't stop doing stupid things all day long. It's like, what's the problem here? And it's easy to feel bad about ourselves. It's really important to notice that like 98% of what we do in the course of daily life is perfectly normal. It's perfectly reasonable under the circumstances. And the 2% that doesn't feel so reasonable is opportunity for us to reimage or reimagine things. And then the goals. So the goals is like a really short section, and I kind of use this in combination with step 11, because step 11 focuses us on how are we taking this out into the world? How are we going to take our experience just sitting here in this 15 minutes and make some kind of like positive, have that be worth something in how we treat people or interact with situations that come up in our lives. So that's the last part is really, I think, important, because it refocuses me away from myself. So anyway, we have a bunch of questions, and I'm going to open these up to the panelists. We have just a few minutes to go through these. So why did EDA change the original 10th step practice? Well, I had something to do with that, and a lot of it was because like focusing on what I did wrong, and like I do the inventory now, half my time is focused on figuring out what I'm going to do right. And in the format that I'd been familiar with before, it just didn't feel positive. I was busy, as Nuria said, busy being Debbie Downer, not a fun person. It's like, that was me, and that was what my 10th step felt like. And I didn't want to do it. It just felt miserable. And I couldn't make myself do it. I stopped. And you know what? In the end, trusting myself was the right thing to do. I had to fix it. I had to make it work for me. So it's different a little bit, mostly because it works better. And it does focus us on what's going right, as well as what we need to do to make it better. Next, so does anybody else want to speak about like the 10th step practice being different from other 12-step programs?
I do want to make a point. This is Nuria from Charleston, South Carolina. At the end of what I was used to, the nightly review, at the end of it, it does say, be careful not to drift into morbid reflection. It was directing me to not fall into that Debbie Downer,
Yeah.
And so it's telling us not to, but I feel that the EDA allows us to take it kind of like it gives us a definition of what that looks like. Like, okay, so I shouldn't drift into morbid reflection. How do I do that? And how do I do that is I look at what's good, I look at goals, and it's like more clear-cut directions just to expand upon what, in my opinion, is what they were talking about.
That's a really good point. I don't think it's necessarily different at all, but I think that my interpretation of it was desperately negative. This is fun. Yeah, great. Thanks for mentioning that. Okay, I know we're short on time, so let's go through the rest of the questions. So what exactly is a spot check inventory?
Hi, this is Michelle. I'm in
Michelle.
recovery from eating disorder. I made it on the call.
Yay!
From Covington, thank you. I love the spot check inventory. So I've had a lot of experience with this, and I actually have a very practical example. So my spot check inventory is, like I said, my favorite. It saves the day all the time. So I keep little scraps of paper with me. I'm okay with writing on anything. And during the course of the day, if something happens, I can just write a simple word down if I can't deal with it. And for me, it enables me to say to myself, okay, I will deal with this, but right now I need to be present and focus on what is at hand. So before, I would just obsess about what the issue was. And it made things a lot worse because I was focusing on myself. I wasn't able to, if I was at work, be a useful employee, or I was making mistakes, which just compounded all the problems and everything. So having that tool of just being able to write it down when my mind went to the quote unquote problem, I would just say to myself, wait a minute, it's written down. I'm going to deal with this. It's okay. What's the next right thing? What can I do to be present and be here? And so it was a way of kind of taking care of myself, that I wasn't just dismissing this issue. And it's also gave me permission not to think about it obsessively. That's one thing. but it's also a little bit more, because like, I'll give you the example of today. So this morning I woke up, did my inventory. I have like a little format where I jotted a bunch of things down from the book. At the top, I have the big 8, you know, the despair, fear, whatever, from 4th step at the top. And then like, I usually try to flip things around and get positive and all that stuff. So I'm writing, and like, there were some things that I did yesterday that were like, turned out to be really good tools. Like, I was listening to somebody and I was actually able to have an authentic conversation. It was my boss, rather than be worried about what she thinks about me and all this other stuff. So good, leave great inventory, blah, blah, blah. I'm leaving the work. By the time I got to work, I felt off. And it says in the book about, you know, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Well, you know what? I'm really tired. But I felt really off, and I felt like things were a problem. And I have a red flag, which is when I get the efforts, you know, and not the good kind of effort where it's like surrender to win, but it's the bad kind of efforts. And so I was like, I just caught myself. I was like, wait a minute. And it took a little piece of notepad. I was like, what's the problem? And it's so interesting to me how an hour and a half later, after doing this great inventory, all the stuff that I wasn't able to see in the morning just was bubbling up. And I just wrote down all of my words, all of the things that were one word for each of them that were bothering me, and stuff that's kind of like really important. And I looked at the list. I was like, all right, I can't write about this right now because I'm at work. But you know what? All of these problems have a solution. Nothing is something that is irreparable or not solvable. You know, my health plan changed. I need to get a new doctor and a new dentist. You know what? I will find a new doctor and a new dentist. I'm really bothered by this, but you know, there's a solution to it. And so tonight, later tonight, I had a little bit of free time and I wrote on this stuff, you know, and that's the kind of stuff that, like, I love a spot check, because if I just am waiting to have this one moment in time that I set aside for it, that's not my eating disorder. That's not how it works. It will come and get me anytime it can. You know what I mean? And the spot check inventory is just a way that I get perspective. It's a way that I get some balance back in. It gives me an opportunity to just put things to the side and move forward, that, you know, that I can be loving to myself and to other people and be a good purpose in this world, and still, like, not, I'm saying it right. It's like, it's, and like, actually have it be something like a source of strength. That's what I'm trying to say. You know, if I don't deal with stuff, it comes back at me in a very ugly way. And this is like, the spot check is just a source of strength. And I guess I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. I love the specific examples. Way to go. Let's move on to the next one. So I've started doing a daily inventory, but it's frustrating because it never feels good enough. And it makes me want to cry. I hate having to think about all the miserable ways I've interacted with people and all the miserable thoughts I've had all day. That sounds so much like judgment. So anybody want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. This is Emily. I'll speak to that.
Sure, go ahead.
I mean, I think that sounds really relatable. I can say that, like, I think what's even been mentioned a few times, that sometimes, like, I know for me, I can use anything, including the program, as a weapon against myself. I'm sure that, like, the founding, like, you know, people of the 12-step programs would not be pleased with some of the, like, things I've beat myself up with, including my inventory. And so I think that's why when we were talking about like time checking it, or I think was I forget what it was called, but I really liked it. What was it called? I wrote it down.
Time boxing.
Time boxing. Thank you. Time boxing it, or like, really honestly corralling myself in was very important. Like, I too only do 1, 2, or 3 things that are negative. That's it. That's done. And then as part of those, that's like a very short format too. Like, I specifically have, you know, like, my part, but I also have, like, it's very important for me to do, like, you know, like a resolution, or like, you know, what could I do differently, and then to move on. And then it's very, very, very important for me to include the two sections, which are the right thinking and positive action, and then the gratitude. And just for me to finish with those, because otherwise I'm going to be dwelling on the first part. So yeah, it can be really heavy, but if you purposefully structure in things to help focus, for me, my usually negative mind on what can I do in the future to avoid this situation or to rectify it so I don't have to go through this experience again. And then, hey, let's look at what we did right, because like I know that that was hard to look at those things that didn't go so well. I don't know. So that's what helps me in my inventory. I'll pass.
Thanks, Emily. I love your stories. So there's two more questions. I know we're just about at time, but I will answer. We'll go through them, and we do. I do want to open this up for those after. But just in case the people have to leave, we're just going to take a look briefly at the assignments for next week, which are to complete Step 10 workshop worksheets 32 and 33, completing the daily inventory, and reviewing it with someone else for 2 weeks to make sure that what you're focusing enough on resolutions and on what you're doing right, the positives, because sometimes we don't have any perspective on this at all. And that would have been me. It was all about me and self-focused. And so actually reviewing things with other people was very helpful. Step 11, prep, reading workshop worksheets, pages 34 and 35, and EDA Big Book, chapter 6, to step 11 and pages 192 and 198. So I'm going to back up and we're going to go back through the last two questions. So second to the last, my sponsor wants me to do a nightly inventory like she does, but the end of the night I'm exhausted and it just feels like punishment. I hate to say it, but I'm very resistant to picking this up again. Isn't a spot check inventory enough? Who wants to answer that?
Hi, I'm Michelle. I am in full recovery. I do my regular inventory. I don't know what to say in terms of, but to me, they're very different. I guess that's what I'd like to say. To me, one is like the discipline of, y'all started out when I got on the call talking about 10, 11, and 12 kind of as a unit, as a growth step. Mm-hmm. And to me, there's something that's a little bit different about my 10th step. Because it's me sitting down, it's the beginning of a quiet time. It's not in response to life. It's like part of nurturing myself. And I think that for me is the big difference. That I'm choosing an action that is about insight and growth that's independent of what's going on around me, because my insight and growth is important no matter what's going on around me, even when things are quiet. And that's all I wanted to share, I guess.
Thanks, Michelle. And the other thing is that do the inventory when it makes sense to you. I mean, I had to move mine to the morning because if I did anything at night, it's like my mind goes dark. So anyway, next question is, I intensely dislike gratitude lists. Having to do them creates resentment. Yes, I have many reasons to be grateful, but having to reflect on gratitude feels like denying how angry I am. It feels dishonest. I feel hopeless about my recovery if I can't even get myself to do this simple exercise. Where do I go from here? Anybody relate to that?
I can relate to that from my first experience with gratitude lists.
Is that Bonnie?
Yes, it is. This is Bonnie in California.
Thanks, Bonnie. Go ahead.
The trick for me is that I kept trying to make gratitude lists of things I felt I should be grateful for, but I wasn't right then. And I could make lists all day of things I should be grateful for, but I'm not. The trick for me is always to find just one thing that I honestly feel grateful for right then, and write that down. If my gratitude list is one thing, that's fine. It just has to generate the feeling of gratitude. And I find that if I can find that feeling, that I can find other things. And then by the end of the list, I may even be grateful for the things that in the beginning I thought I should be grateful for, but I wasn't.
I've had that experience too, Bonnie. You're not alone. Okay, very cool. Thank you so much. And we have people on the call who may not have had their questions answered. I did want to reflect on the fact that many people start on a step 10 practice shortly after their step 3, because really step 10 is what keeps us focused on recovery, even as we're doing the steps. So I encourage my sponsees to pick up step 10 as soon as they can. But, maybe that's not your experience. So anybody on the phone have other questions that our panelists can answer? Alt-A to unmute, or *6 if you're on a phone.
Hi, this is Margaret. I just wanted to share something. Today I was talking with my therapist, and I'm in a legal suit right now. And I shared my anxiety about if I don't get this